Rosa Martinez sat on the cold concrete, watching the morning rush hour begin. People walked past her like she was invisible. Their fancy shoes clicked on the sidewalk as they hurried to their warm offices and cozy coffee shops. But nobody looked, down at the woman sitting by the old brick wall. Her fingers were stiff from the cold morning air. The cardboard sign next to her was getting wet from the light rain that had started falling. The words were simple. "Please help, God bless." But even those words seemed to bounce off people like they were written in a language nobody wanted to understand. Rosa had been living on these streets for 3 long years now. 3 years since her small apartment became too expensive, and she had nowhere else to go. She was 62 years old, and her whole life had changed in ways she never imagined possible. Every morning was the same routine. She would wake up wherever. She had found shelter the night before, sometimes under the bridge, sometimes in the doorway of a closed shop, sometimes on a bench in the park if the police didn't move her along. Her body ached from sleeping on hard surfaces, and her clothes carried the smell of too many nights without a proper shower. The hardest part wasn't being hungry, though her stomach often reminded her that her last meal had been yesterday's leftover, sandwich from the church. The hardest part wasn't being cold, even though her thin jacket couldn't keep out the wind that seemed to cut right through her. The hardest part was being treated like she didn't exist. Rosa remembered when she used to be somebody. She had worked at a clothing factory for 25 years, her hands moving quickly and skillfully over fabric and thread. She had been good at her job, proud of the beautiful clothes she helped create, but when her hands started hurting from arthritis, when her fingers couldn't move as fast as they used to, the factory let her go. Her disability checks weren't enough to pay rent that kept going up every year. Her daughter lived far away in another state, struggling with her own family and bills. Her son had his own problems and couldn't help. Rosa had tried everything. She had filled out forms for help, waited in long lines at government offices, and applied to live in cheaper housing. But there were always more people than available homes, and somehow Rosa kept getting pushed to the back of the line. So here she was, watching the world go by from ground level. She had learned to make herself small, to not take up too much space, to not ask for too much. $1 here, some loose change there. It was enough to buy a cheap meal, or maybe a cup of hot coffee on the coldest days. The businessman in the expensive suit crossed to the other side of the street when he saw her coming. She had noticed him doing this for weeks now. The young mother with the little girl always grabbed her child's hand tighter and walked faster when they passed Rosa's corner. The shop owners sometimes came out and asked her to move along, saying she was bad for business. Rosa understood. She knew how she looked to them. Her clothes were worn and patched. Her hair hadn't been properly washed in days. Her face was weathered from sun and rain and wind. She looked like someone who had given up, someone who had lost her way. And maybe, in some ways, she had. But inside, Rosa was still the same person who had once sewn beautiful dresses, who had once danced at her daughter's wedding, who had once believed that hard work and kindness would be enough to get by in this world. Inside, she was still the woman who loved to read books when she could find them, who remembered every birthday and holiday, who said a prayer every night for people who had more troubles than she did. The problem was that nobody could see that person anymore. All they saw was the homeless woman on the corner, the problem that made them uncomfortable, the reminder that life could be cruel and unfair. So they looked away, walked faster, pretended she wasn't there. Rosa had started to believe them. Some days, she felt like she really was disappearing, like she was becoming more and more invisible with each passing day. She had stopped looking at herself in store windows and car mirrors because the person looking back seemed like a stranger. The rain was getting heavier now, and people were opening umbrellas and pulling up hoods. Rosa pulled her thin jacket tighter around her shoulders and moved closer to the building wall, trying to find a small shelter from the weather. Her cardboard sign was getting soggy, the words starting to blur. This was her life now. Counting coins, avoiding trouble, trying to stay warm and dry and safe, making it through another day, then another, hoping that tomorrow might be different, but not really believing it would be. She had forgotten what it felt like to have someone call her name, to have someone ask how she was doing and actually wait for an answer. She had forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone, to be more than just a person asking for spare change. But on this rainy Tuesday morning in November, as Rosa sat on the cold sidewalk watching people hurry past without seeing her, she didn't know that someone was about to change everything. Someone was about to look at her and see not just a homeless woman, but a human being with a story worth hearing and a life worth saving. Someone was about to remind Rosa Martinez that she was still somebody, that she still mattered, and that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the simple act of one person truly seeing another. Antonio Silva walked the same route to work every morning for 2 years, down 5th Street, past the coffee shop, around the corner to the community center where he worked as a counselor. He had his routine: grab coffee, check his phone, think about the day ahead. Like everyone else, he was busy, focused, moving through life at the speed that modern life demanded. But 3 weeks ago, something changed. He noticed Rosa sitting by the old brick building, and something about her made him slow down. Maybe it was the way she sat so quietly, not calling out to people or being aggressive like some others he had seen. Maybe it was the sadness in her, eyes that reminded him of his own grandmother back in Mexico, who had struggled so much when she first came to America. The first time Antonio stopped, it was just to drop a few coins in the small cup beside Rosa. But when he looked at her face, really looked at her, he saw something that made him pause. This wasn't just someone asking for money. This was a person, a real person with a story, with feelings, with a life that had somehow gone wrong. "Good morning," he said, and Rosa looked up at him with surprise. Most people who gave her money never made eye contact, never spoke. They dropped their coins and kept walking, like they were feeding a parking meter. "Good morning," Rosa replied, her voice soft and uncertain. She wasn't used to conversations anymore. That small exchange stayed with Antonio all day. While he was at work helping other people with their housing problems and family troubles, he kept thinking about the woman on the corner. When he walked home that evening, he looked for her, but she was gone. He wondered where she spent her nights, whether she was safe, whether she had enough to eat. The next morning, Antonio found himself walking a little slower as he approached Rosa's corner. She was there again, sitting in the same spot, with the same wet cardboard sign. This time, instead of just dropping coins and walking away, he stopped and crouched down to her level. "How was your night?" he asked. "Did you find somewhere warm to sleep?" Rosa stared at him like he was speaking a foreign language. Nobody had asked her a personal question in months. Nobody had cared about her comfort or safety. She was so used to being invisible that genuine concern felt strange and overwhelming. I was okay," she managed to say. "Thank you for asking." Antonio could see that she wasn't okay. Her clothes were damp from the morning dew, her face was tired, and her hands were shaking slightly from the cold. But he also saw something else: intelligence in her eyes, dignity in the way she carried herself despite her circumstances, and a kindness that hadn't been destroyed by years of hardship. "What's your name?" Antonio asked. "Rosa," she said, and then added quietly, "Rosa Martinez. I'm Antonio. I work at the community center down the street. I help people with housing and social services." For the first time in a long time, Rosa smiled. Not a big smile, but a real one. Someone had asked her name. Someone had introduced himself to her like she was a regular person worth knowing. This became their daily routine. Every morning, Antonio would stop and talk to Rosa for a few minutes before work. He learned that she was originally from Puerto Rico, that she had once worked in a clothing factory, that she loved to read but hadn't held a book in years. He discovered that she had children who lived far away, that she had tried to get help from various agencies but kept getting lost in paperwork and long waiting lists. Rosa began to look forward to these morning conversations. For those few minutes, each day, she felt human again. Antonio didn't talk down to her or treat her like she was damaged. He asked about her opinions on things, the weather, the news, the construction happening down the street. Simple conversations that most people take for granted. But to Rosa, they were precious gifts. Antonio learned that Rosa was incredibly smart and well-informed. She might not have a home, but she kept up with current events by reading newspapers that people threw away. She had strong opinions about politics and social issues. She remembered details about their previous conversations and asked Antonio about his work and his family. The more Antonio got to know Rosa, the more frustrated he became with the system that had failed her. He worked in social services. He knew how these programs were supposed to work. But somehow Rosa had fallen through every crack, been overlooked by every safety net. She had been trying to get into transitional housing for months, but her applications kept getting lost or delayed. Antonio started bringing Rosa small things. A hot cup of coffee on cold mornings, a sandwich when he had extra lunch, an umbrella when rain was forecast. But more than the physical items, he brought her something she had been missing for years: respect and genuine human connection. One morning, Rosa told Antonio about her arthritis, how it had cost her job and started the chain of events that led to her homelessness. She showed him her hands, swollen and painful, and explained how she used to create beautiful clothes but couldn't hold the tools anymore. "You're still creative?" Antonio said. "You're still talented. Those things don't disappear just because circumstances change." Antonio's words planted a seed in Rosa's heart. For the first time in years, she began to remember who she used to be. Not just the homeless woman on the corner, but Rosa Martinez, the skilled seamstress, the proud mother, the woman who had dreams and abilities and value. Antonio's grandmother had always told him that love wasn't just a feeling, it was action. And as he got to know Rosa, he realized that she needed someone to take action on her behalf. She needed an advocate, someone who understood the system and could fight for her when she was too tired to fight for herself. Rosa didn't know it yet, but her life was about to change completely, because Antonio had decided that knowing her story wasn't enough. He was going to help her rewrite it. Antonio couldn't stop thinking about Rosa's situation. Every day when he went to work at the community center, he helped other people navigate the housing system, fill out applications, and connect with services. But here was Rosa, sitting on the street corner every morning, unable to get the help she desperately needed. It didn't make sense, and it wasn't right. During his lunch break, Antonio decided to make some phone calls. He started with the housing authority, asking about Rosa's application for transitional housing. After being transferred 3 times and waiting on hold for 20 minutes, he finally reached someone who could look up her case. "Rosa Martinez? Let me see. Yes, we have her application here. She's on the waiting list." "How long has she been waiting?" Antonio asked. "Looks like 6 months, maybe 7. Antonio felt his stomach tighten. 7 months of Rosa sleeping on the streets while her paperwork sat in some office. What's the holdup? Why hasn't she been placed anywhere? Well, there are several issues. She's missing some documentation. Her address information is outdated, and there's a problem with her identification that needs to be resolved. Antonio took careful notes. These were all problems that could be solved, but only if someone knew how to navigate the system. Rosa had been trying to handle this alone, without understanding why her applications kept getting rejected or delayed. That evening, Antonio stopped by Rosa's corner again. She was getting ready to find a place to sleep for the night, gathering her few belongings into a worn plastic bag. "Rosa, I want to help you with your housing application. Antonio said. I made some calls today, and I think I can figure out what's going wrong. Rosa looked at him with a mixture of hope and fear. She had been disappointed so many times that she was afraid to believe things could actually get better. You would do that for me? She asked quietly. Of course. That's what friends do for each other. The word friends hit Rosa like sunshine after a long storm. When was the last time someone had called her a friend? When was the last time someone had cared enough about her to spend their own time trying to help her? Over the next 2 weeks, Antonio became Rosa's advocate and guide through the complex world of social services. He took time off work to accompany her to appointments she had been trying to handle alone. He helped her gather the documents she needed, explaining each form and making sure everything was filled out correctly. The first stop was the identification office. Rosa's ID had expired, and without current identification, she couldn't complete most applications. But getting a new ID required documents that Rosa didn't have easy access to, like utility bills from an address where she no longer lived. Antonio knew the system well enough to find solutions. He helped Rosa use the community center's address as a mailing location. He contacted government offices to get copies of her birth certificate and social security card. Tasks that would have taken Rosa months to figure out on her own were completed. In days, with Antonio's help, the difference was striking. When Rosa called offices alone, she often got put on hold indefinitely or told to call back later. When Antonio called, people answered his questions and provided helpful information. When Rosa showed up alone at appointment offices, she sometimes waited hours only to be told she was missing paperwork. When Antonio came with her, they were seen promptly and given clear instructions about next steps. It wasn't fair, and Antonio knew it. Rosa was just as intelligent and deserving as anyone else, but the system treated her differently because of how she looked and where she lived. She needed someone with Antonio's knowledge and social confidence to open doors that had been closed to her. The breakthrough came when Antonio discovered something that made him angry. Rosa's application for rapid rehousing assistance hadn't been rejected. It had been approved months ago, but due to a filing error, it had been sitting in the wrong pile on someone's desk. Rosa had been sleeping on the streets while the help. She qualified for gathered dust in an office. Antonio didn't let this slide. He requested meetings with supervisors, he documented the error in writing, and he made sure that Rosa's case was moved to the front of the line. He used his professional connections and his understanding of bureaucracy to cut through red tape that had been strangling Rosa's chances. Within 2 weeks of Antonio's intervention, Rosa received a phone call that changed everything. She had been approved for a small studio apartment in a subsidized housing complex. The rent would be affordable based on her disability income, and she could move in immediately. Rosa couldn't believe it. After 3 years on the streets, after countless rejections and delays, she was finally going to have a home again. When she told Antonio the news, tears streamed down both their faces. The day Rosa got her keys, Antonio helped her move her few possessions into the tiny apartment. It wasn't much, just one room with a small kitchen and bathroom, but to Rosa it felt like a palace. She had 4 walls, a roof, a door that locked, and a bed that was hers alone. Standing in the empty apartment, Rosa looked at Antonio with overwhelming gratitude. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You saved my life." But Antonio knew the truth was more complicated than that. Yes, he had helped Rosa navigate the system and fight for services she deserved. But Rosa had taught him just as much. She had shown him what real resilience looked like, what dignity meant in the face of hardship, and how powerful it could be when one person simply refused to let another person disappear. Rosa had her apartment, but more importantly, she had rediscovered something she thought she had lost forever. The knowledge that she mattered, that she was worth fighting for, and that she wasn't alone in the world. Their friendship had given them both something precious. Rosa had found an advocate who saw her true worth. And Antonio had found a person who reminded him why his work mattered and what love in action really looked like. Rosa's first night in her own apartment was magical. She sat on the small bed that came with the furnished studio and looked around at her four walls. The room was tiny, just enough space for a bed, a small table, and a kitchenette, but it was hers. She could lock the door and know that nobody would wake her up and tell her to move along. She could take a shower whenever she wanted. She could make a cup of tea at midnight if she felt like it. For the first few weeks, Rosa barely left her apartment except to buy food and handle necessary business. She was almost afraid that if she went out for too long, the apartment might disappear, like it was all just a wonderful dream. She spent hours just sitting by the window, watching people walk by on the street below, amazed that she was now one of the people with a home to return to. Antonio continued to visit regularly, bringing books from the library like he had promised. Rosa's eyes lit up when she saw the novels and poetry collections he carried. She hadn't read a book in over 3 years, and holding one in her hands again felt like greeting an old friend. "I used to love reading," Rosa told Antonio as she carefully turned the pages of a mystery novel. "I would read every night before bed when I had my old apartment. I missed it so much." Antonio watched Rosa rediscover simple pleasures that most people took for granted. She would spend hours reading, completely absorbed in stories that took her mind far away from her recent struggles. She started cooking simple meals in her tiny kitchen, proud to be making her own food again instead of depending on whatever she could find or afford on the streets. But the most amazing change was in how Rosa saw herself. Living in her own space, having privacy and safety, she began to remember who she used to be before homelessness had stolen her identity. She started taking better care of herself, washing her clothes regularly, styling her hair the way she used. She looked in the mirror and saw Rosa Martinez again, not just the invisible woman from the street corner. Antonio helped Rosa reconnect with services she needed. Together they visited a doctor who could help with her arthritis pain. Rosa had been suffering for years without proper medical care, just accepting the constant ache in her hands and joints as something she had to live with insurance and a permanent address. She could finally get treatment that reduced her pain and improved her mobility. "My hands feel better than they have in years," Rosa told Antonio after starting her new medication. "I never thought they could feel this good again." With less pain in her hands, Rosa started to think about things she hadn't considered in a long time. She began to wonder if she could do some kind of work again. Maybe not in a factory, but something that would give her purpose and help her contribute to the world. Antonio introduced Rosa to other residents in her building. Many of them were older people like herself, people who had faced their own challenges and struggles. Rosa found herself making friends for the first time in years. She would sit in the building's small common area, talking with neighbors about their lives, their families, their hopes for the future. One of her new friends, an elderly man named Carlos who lived down the hall, told Rosa about volunteer opportunities at the community center where Antonio worked. "They're always looking for people who want to help others," Carlos said. "Maybe you could talk to your friend Antonio about it." The idea excited Rosa more than she expected. She had received so much help from others. Maybe now she could give something back. When she mentioned it to Antonio, his face broke into a huge smile. "Rosa, that's a wonderful idea. We have a program that helps people navigate housing applications and social services. Who better to help with that than someone who has been through the system herself?" Rosa started volunteering at the community center 2 days a week. She helped other people fill out paperwork, shared her experiences with navigating bureaucracy, and most importantly, she showed them that it was possible to rebuild your life even after losing everything. The first person Rosa helped was a young woman named Isabella who had lost her apartment after losing her job. Isabella was overwhelmed by all the forms and requirements, ready to give up hope. Rosa sat with her patiently, explaining each document, sharing her own story, and encouraging Isabella to keep trying. "I know it seems impossible right now," Rosa told Isabella. "I felt the same way. But there are good people who will help you, and there are programs that work if you can get through all the paperwork. Don't give up on yourself." When Isabella got approved for temporary housing a month later, she came back to thank Rosa with tears in her eyes. "You gave me hope when I had none left," Isabella said. "You showed me that someone like me could still matter to other people." Rosa realized that helping others was healing something deep inside her own heart. For years, she had felt useless, like she had nothing valuable to offer the world. But now she understood that her experiences, even the painful ones, could be gifts to other people facing similar struggles. Antonio watched Rosa bloom with pride and deep affection. The woman who had once sat invisibly on the street corner was now a respected volunteer, a good friend, and someone who brought light into other people's darkest moments. She had found her purpose again, her sense of self-worth, her place in the community. What had started as Antonio's compassion for a homeless woman had grown into something much deeper, a genuine friendship built on mutual respect and love. Rosa often told people that Antonio had saved her life, but Antonio knew the truth was more beautiful than that. They had saved each other, and in doing so, they had discovered that the most powerful kind of love doesn't always look the way people expect it to. 2 years later, Rosa Martinez stood in front of the city council meeting room, her hands steady as she held her prepared speech. The arthritis pain that had once made her fingers useless was now manageable with proper treatment. Her voice was clear and confident as she looked out at the council members and the crowd of people who had come to support her. 2 years ago, I was homeless," Rosa began. "I sat on street corners asking for help, and most people walked by like I didn't exist. Today, I'm here to tell you that every person sleeping on our streets has a story, has value, and deserves a chance to rebuild their life." In the audience, Antonio sat with a huge smile on his face. He was so proud of the woman Rosa had become, but he wasn't surprised. He had always seen the strength and intelligence in her, even when she couldn't see it in herself. Rosa continued her speech, sharing statistics about homelessness in their city and advocating for increased funding for housing programs. She spoke about the bureaucratic barriers that keep people trapped in homelessness, and she offered practical solutions based on her own experiences navigating the system. "We need more than just shelters," Rosa explained to the council. "We need programs that treat people with dignity, that provide not just housing but the support services that help people stay housed. We need advocates who can help people navigate systems that are often confusing and overwhelming." After the meeting, several council members approached Rosa to ask more detailed questions about her proposals. They were impressed by her knowledge and her passion. One council member told her, "You should consider running for office yourself someday. We need more voices like yours in government." Rosa laughed at the suggestion, but privately she felt a thrill of possibility. 6 months. Earlier, she never would have imagined speaking in public, let alone being taken seriously by elected officials. Now, people sought out her opinions and valued her insights. The friendship between Rosa and Antonio had evolved into something beautiful and unique. They had become chosen family, not related by blood, but bonded by shared experiences and mutual love. Rosa had become like a grandmother to Antonio, offering wisdom and perspective that helped him in his own work and personal life. Antonio had become like a son to Rosa, the family support she had been missing for so many years. Together, they had started a special program at the community center called Bridge Builders. The program paired housed volunteers with people experiencing homelessness, not just to provide services, but to create genuine human connections. The idea was simple but powerful. Everyone needs someone who believes in them, someone who sees their worth even when they can't see it themselves. The program. had been incredibly successful. In 2 years, they had helped over 100 people find stable housing. But more than that, they had changed how their community understood homelessness. Instead of seeing homeless people as problems to be solved or dangers to be avoided, people were beginning to see them as neighbors who needed support. Rosa kept a special place in her apartment for mementos from the people she had helped. Thank you cards, photos, small gifts. Each one represented a life that had been changed for the better. But her most treasured possession was still the first dollar that Antonio had ever given her, now framed and hanging on her wall. That dollar represents the moment my life started to change, Rosa would tell visitors. Not because of the money, but because it came from someone who saw me as a human being worth helping. Rosa and Antonio often spoke at conferences and community events, sharing their story and encouraging others to get involved in helping homeless people in their own communities. Their message was always the same. Small acts of kindness and genuine human connection could change lives in ways that big programs and government policies sometimes couldn't. One evening, as they sat in Rosa's apartment sharing dinner and planning their next community presentation, Rosa looked at Antonio with deep gratitude. "You know," she said, "people always say you saved my life, but I think we saved each other." Antonio nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. "You taught me what real resilience looks like. You showed me that everyone has value no matter what their circumstances. You made me a better person. And you showed me that I still mattered," Rosa replied. "You reminded me that I was still Rosa Martinez, not just a homeless woman. You gave me back my identity and my hope." Their story had become proof that love comes in many different forms. It doesn't always look like romance or traditional family relationships. Sometimes the most profound love is between two people who recognize each other's humanity when the rest of the world has forgotten to look. Rosa had begged for crumbs from hundreds of strangers who gave her nothing. But one person had given her everything she truly needed: respect, friendship, advocacy, and most importantly, the knowledge that she was worthy of love and belonging. Now Rosa and Antonio spent their days making sure that other people wouldn't have to beg for crumbs either. They were creating a community where everyone could find the human connection and support they needed to thrive. Their program continued to grow, their advocacy work continued to make a difference, and their friendship continued to be a source of strength and joy for both of them. They had proven that when one person chooses to truly see another person's worth, it can start a ripple effect that changes not just two lives, but an entire community. Rosa Martinez was no longer invisible. She was a respected advocate, a beloved friend, and living proof that it's never too late for someone's life to be transformed by love.